Kevin, this video, it's for you. In this video today, I want to explain to you what a NAS is. I want to explain to you why you might need one, and also talk about the particular company called Synology and tell you a little bit about their products, show you some of the ones that I would recommend and how to get them at a lower price. Stick with me and let's check it out. So Kevin, just to give some background, is my old RA, then became my roommate and has become one of my, since then, best friends of all time, and we went to college together. So Kevin and I were talking on the phone the other day when he was headed to work, and we were talking about photos and storage and security, and he was getting the cold sweats on the phone as we talked about it, because all of Kevin's photos, all of Kevin's videos, all of his archives and all the stuff that he cares about is on one singular drive. That can be very dangerous because that drive fails, you're toast. So let's talk about NAS systems. NAS, N-A-S, what does that stand for? Network Attached Storage. That is simple in itself. Does it give you much more of a definition? It's not really that clear because you say, well, wait, I could have a single drive attached to the network. Isn't that a NAS? Maybe. I could have two drives in tandem. I could have a multiple array of drives in tandem. I think for our purposes, we're going to talk about a NAS as a redundant array of drives, meaning like multiple, two or more drives. And I'm going to explain why that's important. And I'm also going to promote very clearly and openly Synology because that's what I use and that's what I know. I know QNAP is really good. And in hindsight, had I been able to go back and maybe start with QNAP, I may have, because I'm a real media buff, and I know QNAP likes to serve the media world a lot better. They allow direct connections to the NAS boxes on your desktop so you can edit straight from them, and all that's cool. But I think I've got my situation sorted out, and I've become very familiar with the ecosystem in Synology, and I love it. A couple years ago, I had a hard drive connected to my computer, and one day I went to access and look at some files, and I couldn't. So I didn't think anything of it. I restarted my computer and it came up and the drive wasn't there. And I was like, that's really confusing. So I restarted it 2 or 3 times, unplugged the drive, unplugged the power on the drive. Probably shouldn't have done that because when a drive's ready to go, the next move could be the worst move. But I could never get the drive to initialize and hit the computer again, so I couldn't get to the files. And that's when the cold sweat started, because that's when I realized every DV tape, every 8mm tape, every tape that I've ever converted. Now, it's not that I don't have the tapes anymore. I still do. But all the work I did to make those tapes into movies, now all the digital photos, those were going to be gone because those aren't on film or they're not on negatives and they're not laying around the house anywhere. So when my wheels started spinning just how bad this is going to be, me telling my wife when she wakes up today that we've lost all of our precious memories, that was not good. I was freaking out. Luckily, and I don't know how, there was some program somewhere that somehow could still see the drive. And I don't even remember how I discovered this, but this program had an export feature. I was able to export all the photos onto a new drive. That day, I got online and I ordered my first Synology NAS. It was a little white box with 2 drives. And I said, I'm never going to lose my stuff again. Now, I'm still not the safest when it comes to storage, but I'm doing a lot better than I used to. But I had this little drive box, and it was a 2-bay drive box, and I used it for years, but I soon filled it up very quickly, and I moved in and graduated to other things. But this site is called Tech Wake, and we like to live a little bit in the wake of technology. We don't want to buy the first, crispiest, brand newest thing out there. We want to have that thing that's a value, maybe 2, 3 versions old. Let's do this. Let's jump to the Synology site, and let me walk you through some of the products and talk about some of the ideas that I have about the products and why these should be something you should consider. And we'll talk about how to get value after looking at all these and familiarizing yourself with how they work, what they do, and how they can benefit you. Okay, we're going to go to the Synology site and we're going to look at some of the products, and we're going to stick to the desktop NAS. We're not going to get into this other fancy stuff because we're just getting the basics. So when you click on this desktop NAS, you're going to come up and see some pretty big drive bays and large equipment right off the bat. We're going to scroll down. Now, I'm going to make a deal. I'm going to say that I'm not going to allow you to buy a single drive NAS. It just doesn't make any sense because you really have no protection with that. And I'll explain all of that stuff in just a minute. I'm going to say that you have to at least stay with 2 bays, and I would prefer you to go with 4. I'm going to show you also where you can go to find these maybe open box buy, slightly used, other variations that might help you out. Right off the bat, you're going to see down here the DS118. That's going to be kicked. That's a 1 bay. And then you have the 218 Play 2 bay. These drives here are called the value series. And I'm going to punt and say no value series. And here's my criteria for the server that you're going to have to buy. This NAS server is going to need to do 3 things. It's going to need to be new enough to run the DSM 7.0. DSM is Disk Station Manager. Think of it as the operating system for the NAS. This NAS really is like a computer. And when you go down into its interface, you feel like you're on a computer. It's kind of basic, but it does feel kind of Windows-ish, but it's a totally different setup, and it has you geared towards storage and server functionality. Now, the new 7.0 offers a version of the Photos application that I think is the best, and it's probably one of the main reasons that I've upgraded my unit this year. So I'm going to say, first of all, it has to be new enough to have DSM 7.0. It has to be scalable, and I'll explain that in a minute, and it also has to be more than 1 drive. So with that criteria, that's going to bring us to the DS Plus series. And I'm going to skip out on the DS220 and the DS420 because those aren't scalable. And I'm also going to, and if you look here, what I'm talking about scalable, see how it says scales up to 7, scales up to 9, scales up to 15 drives? I'll explain that in just a minute. So we're going to stick with the 720 all the way up to the 1821. Probably skip out on the 1821 due to size and price. And we'll go from 1621 to the 720. This is going to be our meat and potatoes section right here. Let's talk about scaling for a second. When you talk about scaling, we're talking about this drive, this 2-bay drive. It'll have 2 hard disks inside. And the way you protect your data is one of the disks has exactly the same data that's on the other disk. And we'll look at this in more detail in a second. But one of the things that you want to be able to do is grow. So increasing the size, you'd have to pull out one drive, put in a bigger drive, let the other drive write the data back across to it, and then do the same thing on the other side in order to have security. But this box has something called scalability that it allows you to have the Synology DX517 added onto it. And in the back plane of this box, on the back plane of this box, you can see there's a little red eSATA connection with 2 little screw downs, and you can take another Synology box without a brain, so basically it's just a dead box with some drives in it, and hook it into this thing, and this thing's front-end software and drives could all be fused together and scaled up to a larger system. So you could start with a 720 and move into a more scalable situation, and you could add one of those expanded drive bays with 5 bays, and that would give you 5 bays plus the 2 in this machine would take you to 7. The other approach would be just get more bays right out of the gate, and there's another benefit to doing that as well. So let's go over to something called the RAID calculator, because in all of these you can see there are multiple drives, and I want to explain protection and how that stuff works in terms of data and storage and space. Synology offers a RAID calculator, which is pretty nice. You can go over here to this calculator and it emulates a really large Synology box, but this doesn't have to be yours. You can just plug in as many drives as you want. So right now there's no drives, there's no information. So let's say for your purposes, we're going to start off and we're going to introduce an 8 terabyte drive. Okay, if you had a single drive bay Synology NAS and you only had one 8 terabyte drive in it, if you look down here, it talks about the different RAID types. These are the types of configurations for the drives that allow for, in some cases or in most cases, drive fault tolerance, meaning if a drive dies, it has some kind of plan to help you protect. Now, a single drive scenario has no protection at all. You can see there's a blue box and there's no blue represented here. If you have a single drive bay NAS and that drive that's in that bay dies, you're toast. So that's not a good idea. That's why I say single drive bay is out. But let's say you go to the 2 drive bay and you add another 8 terabyte drive. Good plan. Now you're up to 2 8 terabyte drives and one has the same data as the other. So basically what it's saying is you have one drive with data and the other drive is for protection. And it doesn't matter which is which. It just means if one dies, the other's good. If the other dies, the other's good. So, but you can see you only get half of the storage capacity with a 2 drive scenario because you have to use one drive to protect the other. Does that make sense? I'm not going to get into all these RAID configurations down here because we're going to stick with SHR. SHR is Synology Hybrid RAID. That is Synology's own in-house RAID system. The reason I like SHR allows you to use different brands of drives, different sizes of drives, and different speeds of drives. And it doesn't argue or complain about that, whereas these other RAID configurations won't give you that latitude. Plus, it's easier to move your RAID array over from box to box when you're using the SHR protocol. So we're going to stick with SHR, and we're going to be between SHR2 and SHR1, okay? So if you notice in this 2-bay scenario, when you try to go to SHR2, you say, well, wait a minute, there's no drives being protected or used for space. Basically, you can't do SHR2. Okay, let me explain the difference. SHR1 says I always have one drive that can fail and I can fix myself. One drive. So you would really call this SHR-1. SHR-2 says I'll allow up to 2 drives to fail and I can fix myself. Well, obviously, if you have a 2-drive configuration and both drives fail, there's nothing left to fix with. You know what I mean? Let's go up here and pretend we bought a 4-bay drive and we put all 8 terabyte drives in there. Now when you go down, of course, you have more space. You're still using one of the drives for fault tolerance. So if you have a failure, you have a backup. But something happens. If you notice, when you have 2 8 terabytes, it's a 50-50 split. When you go to 4 8 terabytes, right, you have 75-25 split. So you're getting a higher percentage of storage with more drives. So the more drives you have, with the same protection, you're going to end up with a little more storage just from a percentage basis. So that's another benefit to having a multiple drive scenario. And let's pretend, let's take all these out, that you had a couple 6s at home, you had a 4, and you had an 8. And you go, okay, how would that look? How does that add up? Well, it's not always going to be intuitive because you have to remember, you have to have enough protection and unused space to protect the largest drive. So you'll notice here you have 6 terabytes and 2 terabytes unused. So you have 8 terabytes of space held aside to take care of the largest drive in the array. So it's not always a great idea to mix and match really small and really big drives because you end up with a kind of a wonky array of disks. But, you know, if you put in 8 right away, you're going to be in good shape. If you say, hey, you know what, I have a bunch of 4s and I just want to start there, and you don't have to fill it up. If you have 4 bays, you don't have to fill it up. You could say, I only have 2 disks and I'm going to start with a 4-bay. And right now, the only protection you can run is SHR, which is mirroring. And you say, but one day I dream of getting another 6 terabyte and I put it in. And you go, oh, wait, what did I get? Now you have 2 drives of storage and 1 drive of protection, 12 and 6. So you just increased your space. Well, wait, I have a 4-bay. I'm going to do 1 more 6. Oh, cool. Now you're all the way up to 18. 6 times 3 is 18. Then you have the extra 6 terabyte for the protection. So that's going to be a good way to kind of get your head around what's happening. Now, you might say, well, Joe, you didn't talk much about SHR2. So SHR2 says, well, Joe, if you want to have the ability to lose 2 drives at one time and still have your data protected, which isn't a bad idea, but it's going to come at a cost. See that? When you have a 4-bay drive and you're trying to protect 2, you end up again in that same mirroring dilemma. So that's where sometimes a 5-bay drive is a little more advantageous because you can get most of your storage and still have a large portion for protection. But honestly, I think for our purposes, let's just do the 1 disk fault tolerance to allow us to at least have some level of protection, but not be overkill and cost us too much money. And I hope this section made sense because it's a little confusing, but it's probably advisable for you to jump on here and take a look around and see what you can come up with different configurations. The nice thing about SHR is you can mix drive speeds, drive size, and drive brands and not have to pay a huge penalty for any of it. So back to the RAIDs, we're looking at anything from the 720 up to probably the 1620. So any of these would be good. I would say you're going to land somewhere from 720, 920 to 1520. Those 3 would be the one you want to look for. So let's just see what we're looking at as far as pricing on these units. So let's go over to Newegg. Here is a 4-bay. Here is a 5-bay. Here's the 1520 plus diskless with no drives inside. Okay. And the standard stock format, this thing is $699. So you can start to see right away, this is not going to be an inexpensive adventure, but I'm going to help you save some money, and I'm going to explain that. The 720 Plus diskless, this one right here, $365. That becomes more affordable. It's brand new. You can start off with 2 large drives, like two 8s or 2 12s or 2 16s, and make it a good long time with that as your server. And then you can scale and upgrade later. And what I was talking about before, this upgrade box is called the DX517. So let me show you what that looks like. Here it is right here. This would allow your 2-bay drive to plug into this one, this large expansion unit, and it plugs in right back here. Let me find the back plane. Yeah, here's your expansion unit. You can see on the bottom right of the screen, eSATA port. So your small 2-bay drive would plug into that hole right there, and you could do one of two things. You could either allocate all of these drives as part of the RAID array, your SHR RAID, volume, or you could make it a separate volume altogether. So you could have like volume 1 on the 2-bay setup, and then have volume 2 spread across these 5 drives. And again, this DX517, you don't have to fill it up with drives once you expand to it. You could start with 2, you could start with 3, you could add them as you go and increase. So that checks the box for the scalability. But right out of the gates, if you were to buy the $300 720 or $350 and the $400 517, you're still $1,000. So you might say, well, if I'm going to do that, maybe I just get a bigger drive bay. And let's look at the 920, DS 920, diskless. And the reason I'm putting in diskless is when they package disks with these, they tend to charge a premium, and it's not usually a good deal. So $549, that's kind of a balance point. It's a little pricey, but it's doable, and this thing is scalable. Here's the thing. I want you guys to get motivated to protect your crap. So the best thing to do is just get something started now. So let's leave this site and let's go where I really think you should be shopping for these units, and that's eBay. Because let's face it, these things are basically computers. And once the drives are out and you're putting in brand new drives, the computer, the turning on, the fan, the power supply, there's only a few things that can break, and it's all repairable very easily. So I would shop around for something used. Now, if you remember the requirements I had for the Synology NAS, I just said, as long as it's new enough to run DSM 7.0 or later. And that's going to be pretty much 3, maybe 4 versions back. So what I would do is spend some time once you've picked the one you want to target and try to go and find it on eBay used. That's what I've done ever since I bought the first one. And so you can even find the expansion units here. See, that's only $385, and I think it was like $450 or $500 on Newegg. So you can save $100 there. You can go over here. You can find like a 1515, which is refurbished. And it's $365, and it's only got 2 days left, so there's a good chance you can get that for probably $450, $500, and that's going to save you a few $100. It's actually worth the try to do that. So let's take an exterior walk around on one of these boxes just to see how this thing would work. So let me show you the front plane of one of these Synologies. This is an old Synology 1512 Plus. This is 12 years old. I've had it for probably 6 years. So that means that I bought it used off of eBay for a really good price 6 years ago. And I've had this thing full of drives, running steady for the whole entire time, has never let me down, and I've even replaced a couple of failed drives. So let's take a look at this front plane. What you have is these 5 bays, and these are doors, and they click. And basically you click it open and you slide it out, and you have like a sled or a tray, and that's where you mount your hard disk drive. And once your drive is in there, you basically put it back in this slot, which usually goes, I'm at the side, so it's kind of weird. You put it in the slot and you click it in place. Once you click it in place, it lights up and shows you that the drive is there. So when you first start out with this, you put as many drives as you want to have in here to start off this unit, and then you log into the software and you set up whatever drive array you have here as the first volume. So that's kind of the concept of the Synology RAID system. So in this case, I always had 5 bays going, and I had one set up as the fault tolerant, so I had 4 bays worth of storage. So it really served me well for a good long time. Let's turn it around and take a look at the back. On the back plane, you're going to see a couple of things here. This has an expansion unit connector here and expansion unit connector here. This thing's kind of a beast, even though it's older. I could take an expansion unit, which I actually have one. I could take this expansion unit, which looks very similar if you look at the front of it. I could take this expansion unit and basically just pop it on top, Then I would have 2 units, and I could hook this connector up here to one of the SATA ports and screw it all together, make sure it was connected properly, and then I would have 2 drive bays set up with different volumes. So I could actually get even one more stackable unit and put it up there. Now these have lockable drive faces, so like they have a little key, and when you shut this and you turn the key, you can actually lock this door shut to where it can't open. Like these have already been locked because there's drives in there. This expansion unit just has a lock that's a slide bar. But I think the new expansion units, this is the old 510, the new expansion units come with a key, so that makes it a little bit better. That's really it on the hardware. You've got a front plane that gives you some indicator lights and a power button, and that's it. You put this thing up in a cupboard and you keep it cool with some fans, and you don't have to do a whole lot with the hardware. So let's take a look at this interface and see what this operating system for the Synology NAS looks like. One of the things I'm going to recommend you get right after you get your Synology NAS is something called Synology Assistant, and that enables you to open an application on your computer and see all the NASs that are NASs, that's plural, NAS. See all the NASs, see all your network devices that are attached from Synology. It's called the Synology Assistant. Let's start up a screen recording. Let's take a look at this software interface. I'm going to give you an overview of what the landscape of this software looks like so you can kind of get a feel of the things that you can do within it. Down here is the first application you're going to want to have when you set up your new NAS. It's called a Synology Assistant. And when you click that, it comes up and it shows you exactly what NAS device is in your network. I'm going to cover this or blur this out, and then you just double click it and it takes you right into the login page. Now I logged in as Joe Simpson, so you can log in as administrator or you can log in as user. Some of the user account privileges that you get is you have File Station, of course. You can go down into the file tree and look at certain things, and you can restrict people's access to certain areas on this NAS as you set up their user accounts. If you're the administrator, you can set any setting you want. I also have Video Station, which is a really nice app to aggregate and keep your movies in one place, and you can watch them distributed across your household, across the web. Same thing with Audio Station. It does the same thing as Video Station, but with music. You have Synology Drive, which is the same thing as Google Drive, but it's a locally housed location. So for example, I have this Mac Mini that I work off of, and I dump all these videos and these recordings onto, and I can go in here to my backup to my Mac Mini, and I have 1, 2, 3 drives that back up to this Synology NAS every night at 2 o'clock. So even if I ruin a card, mess up a camera, something goes wrong, I have these hard drives backing up. Or if one of these drives fails, you know, I have at least some sort of a recent backup of these hard drives to go back to if I need to. The other thing that I really love that I think you guys will really learn to appreciate is the Synology Photos app. And this basically gives you the same feel that you get using, say, Google Photos. You can go back in time, and it does chronological order, and you can find old pictures and old things. You could go to albums. You can look up people and label people. It's really just like Google Photos. It's not quite as good, but it's pretty darn good. So for being in your house in your own NAS is a good way to do it. And the other thing is it has an auto sort and an auto kind of like organization tool. So when you put all your photos that have been on a hard drive for years that you haven't been able to get to, you're going to be surprised just how easy it is to view things. I just want to show this one thing off because it really makes me proud to have it. My mother-in-law had these Super 8 videos from way back. I'm talking like in the 50s. And I mean, I have videos that basically were on like these reel tape things, and I took them over and got them transferred, made into MP4s, and I'm able to let her watch some of these old videos of her kids straight off my NAS. It's really awesome. So you guys will really enjoy that. And then the other thing is Cloud Sync. Let's say you have a Google Cloud account or a Google Drive account. You can use this Google Cloud Sync and say, I want my NAS to back up my Google Drive. And so basically you have a task list, and you can go to Google Drive, and here's my Google Drive folders and all my files that literally are in Google Drive, and it will keep it up to date for you. And if Google goes down or you decide to leave Google, you have your stuff backed up right here. So that's really cool. And that's really the brief overview. Let's log in as admin real quick. I have these passwords memorized in the computer, probably not super safe. So admin, I have some widgets up here. You can see this little box, this little tray of widgets, and it is a quick snapshot of like your volumes and the health of your NAS. It says it's healthy, it's working, and the CPU you can see down here is hardly moving at all right now. Different from the user account is that I have access to Storage Manager and Control Panel. So if I go to Control Panel, there's all different things you can do in here, setting up network settings. You can update and restore software. You can control your hardware and power. You can change like file services, and you can introduce users and groups and determine who you want to have on the system or who you don't want to have on the system. And then you can also go to your Storage Manager. Let me get this widgets thing out of the way here a little bit. And what this does is it shows you your two NAS boxes. I have a 1618 and a 517 expansion unit, and I have separated my volumes. I have one volume on the 1618, which is half full, and then I have the 517, which is, I don't know, 15% full. And on these storage pools, you can go in here and it'll tell you if they're healthy, when the last data scrub was. You can even do something called a hot spare. That's for another video, another time. You have SSD cache available. That's on another level still. We're just staying with basics. But you can go in here and actually look at each individual hard disk as well. And you can go in here and see logs, and it'll give you all the warnings. And you can see all the recent warnings from some of these hard drive failures I was having. I have since fixed them all. But another thing I wanted to demonstrate was disk 1 through 6. You can see that I have an 8 terabyte, and that's a Seagate, and I have several 5 terabytes, and those are Toshiba's, and I have a 5 terabyte Western Digital. So I have different brands, different speeds, different sizes. This thing's humming along like it's nothing. The other thing is on my 517, you can see I have a 5 terabyte and then 4 3 terabytes. So what I'm going to do is slowly migrate in new drives in larger size and take these 4.5s and move them over to my 517. So when you upgrade one, you can kind of upgrade both by using the other drives that were before. So on the storage pool 2, this smaller one, with this extension drive, you can actually do time machine backups to your NAS from your Macs. You can do other sorts of things. And I keep all the non-super crucial critical information on volume 2, and I keep the more important stuff on volume 1. So I hope you guys got a lot out of this. At least you got familiar with the software so you feel comfortable that it's not too intimidating and overwhelming. I mean, you can get deep, but really there's only certain things that you need to know, and it'll walk you through the things that you need to set up initially and kind of get you going. Wow, long video. If you guys are still here after all of that, thank you so much for sticking with me. So a couple of takeaways I want to leave you with, and I'll close this out and let you guys get on with your day. If you're keeping all of your information and critical data on one individual hard disk, you're asking for trouble, and you're going to be heartbroken, I promise you, if you don't change that very soon. At least get a NAS drive with 2 disks so you can do mirroring, some type of protection, get it going sooner than later. If you're going to go with Synology, which I would recommend, go with the Synology 2-bay, 4-bay, or 5-bay, or even higher if you can afford it. Get it implemented as soon as you can, and make sure whatever you buy is scalable so you could grow over time with that unit. And also make sure whatever you're buying is recent enough that it'll run DSM-7. So you have to do a little research on a Synology site, or if you have questions, hit me down below and I'll help guide you through whatever it is you might need to know. If you'd like to see any aspect of this in more detail, or a special function you'd like me to demonstrate, happy to do it. Let me know. Talk to you guys soon. And Kevin, call me. Later.